Hello and welcome to the Foundation Center's Grant-Seeking Basics for Individuals in the Arts webinar. My name is Caroline Herbert. I'm the manager of multimedia training for the Foundation Center and happy to have you with us today. If you're not familiar with us, the Foundation Center is a national nonprofit organization. We've been around since 1956, and our mission is to strengthen the social sector by advancing knowledge about philanthropy in the U.S. and around the world. And today we're going to talk about a very specific area of philanthropy, grant seeking for individuals working in the creative arts. So here's an overview of what we're going to talk about today. And just to set the stage, grants for artists, our topic today, grants for artists can help to relieve financial pressures, provide time and opportunities to boost your career, and of course, give you another credential. So, how do you go about getting these grants? We're going to demystify the process of grant seeking today for individuals in the arts and help you to begin thinking strategically about fundraising for your projects and for your work. As a grant seeking artist, your first step is to learn who supports the arts, what types of support are available, kind of the who, what, how, and why behind funding for artists. That's what we're going to talk about first. Then we're going to move on to clearly defining your own needs. Then we're going to put ourselves in the funder's shoes and assess our qualifications from the funder's perspective. And our ultimate objective is to look for the match between your needs and the interests or priorities of the funder. So that's what we're going to talk about in identifying potential funders, the research strategy, and looking at some specific tools you can use to actually find potential funders. And the last section is talking about applying, so following the guidelines to submit the application will be our last topic. So the first thing we're going to talk about is learning about who supports individuals in the arts. And we're going to break it down to start with to public versus private, direct and indirect. So public and private, I think we probably understand the difference between those. The public funding is those coming from governments, federal, state, local government agencies. Private funding is, of course, what we know the most about the Foundation Center, funding coming from non-governmental organizations such as foundations and other nonprofits, could also be from corporations and individuals. And then what are we talking about direct versus indirect? Some grant makers do fund individuals directly without any kind of intermediary. So you don't have to have an affiliation with a nonprofit. You can apply directly for a grant as an artist. You're not working through any other type of organization. However, direct support to individuals is relatively small. Many more organizations give indirectly. Primarily, they make grants to tax-exempt organizations, which then award the funds to individuals who apply for them. So there are not a lot of foundations that may give directly to you, but you may still benefit from foundation support as an individual artist. And almost all government funding for individuals in the arts occurs indirectly. And many of these intermediary organizations make grants, and really they may be re-granting funds that they get from other institutions. Fiscal sponsorship is another form of indirect support, a very important area of support for artists. So we have a whole section on fiscal sponsorship. This is where you affiliate with a nonprofit organization that will sponsor your work in order to help you obtain funding. And your chances of being funded increase dramatically if you have a fiscal sponsor, because you'll be able to approach funders that otherwise you'd be ineligible to apply for because they don't do the direct funding. They say we only give to 501c3 charitable organizations, so as an independent individual, you wouldn't be able to apply. If you're working under the auspices of an organization as a fiscal sponsor, that opens up many more opportunities for you. So essentially, you're applying for funding, or funding is going through the fiscal sponsor. They apply for the fund and they disperse them to you. And most fiscal sponsors will extract a fee for this service. But it can often be worth it depending on the types of services. They often may provide administrative support, other kinds of technical assistance. And there are actually many organizations in the arts field in the business of fiscal sponsorship helping individual artists. So I'll talk in a minute about how to find those. When you are looking at potential fiscal sponsors, you have to make sure the organization you're looking at is itself a 501c3. Those are the organizations that get grants. So it kind of defeats the purpose if you're looking at an organization that is not a 501c3. Then they may not be in any better position than you are as an individual. And there are various types of fiscal sponsorship, and they differ in terms of the relationship between the sponsor and the recipient. In one type, the project belongs to the sponsor, but is carried out by the recipient under contract. And in that case, the sponsor, of course, will exert a certain amount of control over the project. And essentially, you're kind of like a contractor, maybe doing something under a commission. In another arrangement, the sponsor serves essentially as a granting organization so that the project remains the property of the artists. And organizations interested in serving as fiscal sponsors, as I said, usually do take a strong interest in the project and want to develop a partnership with you. So it's not simply a matter of using an organization's name. So it's a little more involved in that, and it is a legal relationship. So there are actually many examples of fiscal sponsorship organizations and agreements online. We've actually put together a whole section on our website, grantspace.org. In our skill area, we have a skill area for fiscal sponsorship. So when you go to skills, you get a whole list here, one of which is fiscal sponsorship. And when you click on fiscal sponsorship, it brings you to a resource page with a lot of information, including a webinar sponsored by Fractured Atlas. It's one of the organizations out there in the business of fiscal sponsorship for artists. So a lot of good information there. And even if you're not necessarily looking at Fractured Atlas to be your fiscal sponsor, a lot of general information about how these agreements work and what you need to watch out for. And then we have a lot of frequently asked questions, our knowledge base of articles, including questions like, what is a fiscal sponsor? How do I find a fiscal sponsor? And we have a reference to this webinar, a guide to fiscal sponsorship and affiliation. Where can I find examples of policies, procedures, and guidelines, etc. And here is, speaking of Fractured Atlas, here is their website, the information about their fiscal sponsorship program, because this is part of their business is to help independent artists. And here is, if you signed up with them for them to be your fiscal sponsor, they have an agreement you would sign, and this is just an example of the type of agreement and legal terms you may be signing on to. But there's a lot more to look at online within that section of the Grantspace.org website. So we're going to move on. As you can see, we're going to move on to talk about public sources of grants. And of course, this is an area that has seen numerous cuts over the years, starting at the federal level. And as you probably know, the NEA has significantly cut back its funding going directly to individual artists. A lot of money from the federal government does go to the states, but of course, depending on where you live, your state may have cut its budget or cut its arts council. But in many states, there are still these arts councils out there that help support the arts and artists in their communities. And your city, county, municipality may have an arts program as well. Now, these may not be sources of big money. I mean, sometimes they do have artist fellowship for individual artists, but they may be more promotional. They may have exhibit space, performance space you can use, or help promote individual artists or arts in the community, not necessarily be a source of funding. You may also want to look to see if your municipality has what's called a Percent for Arts program, which is where if anyone's still doing public construction, building public buildings, there is a percentage, usually 1% of the budget set aside for public art commissions from local artists. And yeah, there are interesting sources of funding to think about here, like airport and transit authorities may have money set aside for public art commissions. So these are kind of creative opportunities. Think about getting your art in front of people riding the subway or the bus or whatever. The resources we have on this slide: NASA, not the space agency, the National Assembly for State Art Agencies. And we're going to look at their directory in a minute. And also the National Organization Americans for the Arts, which is a national advocacy organization for arts and artists. And they have a lot of good resources as well about arts funding. So here's the website of National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. We're showing you this just to show you that they do have a directory of state arts agencies, so you can figure out if there is anything in your state. Certainly, if you don't already know, if you're not already familiar with what's going on in your community, that should be the first place for you to look to see, is there any local support, even if it's not financial. Are they doing anything to really build and support a local artist community? So just to talk briefly about public support, National Endowment for the Arts, as I said, most of their money is going to states, going to organizations, not directly to individuals. They have some very narrow fellowship categories for individuals in literature, jazz, and the folk arts. National Endowment for Humanities is more for scholars in the humanities, not necessarily creative artists. But then there are some government agencies that you may not think of as art supporters, like the National Park Service. What are they doing up there? They actually do summer residencies for artists at national parks. So if you want to go, sounds pretty nice, going to be the artist in residence at Yellowstone or Acadia National Park as a way to spend the summer. All right, so that is the public support. We're going to focus now on private, which is our main focus here at the Foundation Center. And grants come from a variety of sources in the private arena. Foundations are nonprofit corporations with the principal purpose of making grants, either to unrelated organizations or to individuals, for charitable purposes, which include, cultural, arts, literary purposes. And as we already talked about, most foundations make grants only to nonprofit organizations. But some also do make grants directly to individuals. And if you have, that fiscal sponsorship arrangement, or you're working in collaboration with an organization, you may be eligible for more support. And an example of a private foundation supporting the arts is the Pollock-Krasner Foundation. Now, private foundations, they get their money from the single source. So judging by the name of that foundation, you can tell, okay, this money's set up from those artists from their estates, and they're not publicly supported. They're not out there raising money. Unlike the nonprofit organizations, that's our next category. Nonprofit organizations are raising money from a wide variety of sources, including foundations, individuals, corporations, and many of them are set up to support individual artists. They could be re-granting organizations if they're raising money and then distributing it to individual artists. They may have artist in residence programs, like Art Space is the example we have there, which has residencies in Raleigh, North Carolina for visual artists and emerging artists, where it's studio space and time to work for summer residency. Now, corporations often treat support to individual artists as business expenses. If they're commissioning you to produce work for their buildings or perform for them. Or they may offer in-kind support instead of cash, like donated materials or use of space. Many corporations do host exhibitions. Some corporations do have grant programs for individuals. We have the example here of Capizio, which, as you would imagine, has a dance award and foundation. Now, individual donors are another big source of support. And actually, I think individual donors in the arts are getting a real jump here in recent years because of crowdsourced fundraising platforms like Kickstarter, where you can post your project and raise money from individuals, from your network. So I think that kind of crowdsourced fundraising means that our individual artists are looking at individual donors in a new light, because you have many more platforms now to go out and actually, creatively raise money from individuals from all over the world, not just your closest friends and family, although certainly we would hope they would want to support you. All right, so now that we understand all these different ways you may get money, all these sources, we're going to talk about actually the how you may get money, so the types of support available for artists. So there's a variety of support out there. Cash grants or outright gifts of money, just giving you money to go do your art. That sounds great, but that's relatively rare. If we're talking about grants you can simply apply for as an unknown artist, just unrestricted, here's a check, go keep doing what you're doing. However, you may get a grant for a project, and we have the Artist Trust. It's an example on the slide which does grants for specific projects, which could include the development, completion, or presentation of new works. So it's not necessarily general, unrestricted, no strings attached, but it could be a cash grant for a very specific project of yours. Awards are typically grants for which, in order to be considered, you need to be nominated by a pre-selected group of knowledgeable people. And that Capizio Award we had in the last slide that makes awards in the field of dance, it's by nomination only, so it's really leaders who are contributing to the field. Fellowships recognize and award the artistic achievements of exceptional individual artists, typically by rewarding career accomplishments. So it could be recognizing a long career. However, there could also be fellowships for, like United States Artists, for emerging artists. So not necessarily people at the end of their careers, it could be people at the beginning of their careers. But whatever the type of fellowship, it's typically a very competitive process based on artistic excellence is the key criteria. And not all fellowships are the same. A pure fellowship is simply that money with no strings attached. So that's, as you would imagine, the most rare, the most competitive, usually going to people maybe at the height of their career. And we know the MacArthur Genius Grants are probably the most famous example of those. Other fellowships may have strings attached, such as teaching duties. You can be a fellow at the National Gallery, but you will be teaching master classes. So it's not just getting, you may get money, but there's something expected of you in return. Commissions are sums of money given to create an original work, often for a specific purpose, so it could be for in the performing arts as well as visual arts. Professional development grants fund activities that help you further your career, so it could be, for example, grants to recognize, we have the example in photography, recognizing emerging artists in photography to help you, and the grant is to help you take classes, go to conferences, things like that. Apprenticeships are a little more formal type of professional development. These are intended to support master artists to teach their skills, practices, and culture to less experienced artists. And often prospective master artists and apprentices are required to apply as partners. And mostly the apprenticeship grants, it may give you a stipend, but it also funds the master artist, his or her time, expenses, and supplies. Internships, I think we all know what internships are, intended to support you, to give you a chance to learn and practice under the supervision of more experienced artists, like the J. Paul Getty Trust has an undergraduate internship program for people to work at the Getty Center. And residencies place professional artists at residence in schools, museums, theaters. So you could have that kind of working residency where you're getting space, studio space, performance space, to time to do your work. but you're also expected, like at a school or a theater, expected maybe to teach or to do performances, to do an exhibition. That is a little different from being an artist in residence at an arts colony, where it really is usually a very lovely setting, usually in the summertime, where you're going out to the country and just time away from everything to focus on your work in a community of artists. And that's where you're getting the free room, board, supplies, and the attraction is to allow you to work without financial worries. Often many of them are very prestigious as well. And these are all the different types of support. I have a few more, sorry, one more slide. Here we get into a little mix of things. I mean, the honorary prizes, a lot of these, music, performing arts, and visual arts, where you may not get any money, but you're able to perform, you get exposure. You may, as a visual artist, be included in an exhibition where you're getting, raising your profile. It may also involve in-kind support, where you're getting, for example, in music, you may get like recording time or access to equipment or studio time. And then the hybrid programs where you may get a prize, there's a competition, you get recognition, and you may also get a monetary prize. So a lot out there, a lot of different types of support, a lot of terminology to keep track of. The next thing we're going to focus on is you and defining your own needs for funding. So let's first think about why grant makers may support individual artists. If you're setting up a foundation and you can award grants to for any purpose related to nonprofit charitable purposes, why support individual artists? Well, certainly a love of the arts and wanting to recognize achievement, wanting to support, for example, support emerging artists, help to recognize new artists, to develop new skills, develop their skills. And one of the most popular reasons is to support specific projects, support a community mural project or support your poetry, you're publishing your latest volume of poetry or things like that. So very specific project support. So it's up to you to think about what you're doing, what you're trying to accomplish, and especially if you're trying to find the project grant or the professional development grant. I'm trying to find funding so I can attend master classes or go to this conference to further develop my skills. So I may be looking for arts funders who do professional development. If it's a specific project, like a literary arts project, I'm putting together I'm writing a play based on oral histories of people involved in the civil rights movement. I'm just starting, so I need money for traveling, for research, for recording stories, for project development, story development. So a whole timeline of what your process is. And here's an example of a visual artist of her statement of purpose. And this is from, she was a sponsored artist from New York Foundation for the Arts, which is one of the organizations, we'll talk about them a little bit later. They're one of the organizations that does fiscal sponsorship. So she was fiscally sponsored by them. But this is an example of a very short statement of here's what I'm all about, here's what I'm doing with this public art process. And thinking about a project like this, you have questions, who's going to benefit? So you could say, the whole community is going to benefit if it's a public art project. Figuring out your budget, type of support, besides just, cash, there may be, you may be looking for in-kind support. You may make a lot of sense to get some donated goods and services. You may specifically be looking for a residency or professional development support. And conditions. For example, a residency may seem attractive, but if it's a teaching residency, are you willing to carry out those duties which are going to take away your time to spend on your project and your work? If you receive a commission for a public art project, the finished creation will not belong to you, And you may have to follow certain guidelines regarding style, dimensions, or medium, so you may not have as much freedom to create what you want. So can you live with that? And in many cases, the answer is yes, because you can get significant exposure for public art projects, but just all things to think about. All right, so we're going to move into starting to think about our research strategies and kind of turn the tables and think about what makes us attractive to a prospective funder. So we're really putting together this is sort of like an artist statement, but for fundraising, specifically for fundraising purposes. So you may already have an artist statement where you talk about what you're trying to express and accomplish through your work as an artist. So similar along those lines in terms of a funding profile. It's a tool to help promote yourself as an artist and helps you prepare you to speak about yourself, the development of your style, and can be used as a master document as you start to do grant applications. So of course, thinking about your medium, what are you working in? Photography, bronze sculpture, paper, poetry. Your audience, are there special audiences or participants your work intends to reach, like children, senior citizens, the disabled? Is there historical or cultural significance to your project or the venue? In other words, who's your primary audience other than the general arts public? So its background is outlining your relevant experience, previous exhibitions, performances, publications, what stage of your career are you in? Would you define yourself as emerging artists, etc.? Affiliation. Do you have any affiliations with a professional association in the arts? Nonprofit arts groups, fiscal sponsorship, for example, things that could help you, affiliations that could help you get funding. Geography. A lot of grants do have some kind of geographic restrictions. It may be grants for residents only. Especially certainly if you're looking at the public funding and state arts councils, certainly that's all place-based. You could also think about what communities are going to benefit from my project, where will I be working, if you're going to be in another country. Nationality, ethnicity, race, gender could all apply. There could be specifically funding for women fiction writers or minority artists. So all of that are things to consider. As we go into looking at specific research sources, you're going to use that profile to do the flip side, find funders that, okay, fund people directly. That's one way to look at it. If you do have fiscal sponsor or some kind of affiliation with a nonprofit, you could potentially open up your research to all foundations interested in the arts, not just those that fund individuals directly. Along those lines, you could look at foundations that are interested in the subject matter you're dealing with. Like that example we looked at for the public art project in Richmond, where part of her work was to help revitalize the downtown area. So potentially funders interested in economic development in that community may be interested in funding her project. So you may not necessarily be limiting yourself just to the arts funders. And then here's the flip side of what you might do for a funding profile. Okay, of course I want to find funders that say they support visual artists, performing artists, etc. Fund in my geographic area. Now grant amounts, similar to what you need, a lot of times you don't necessarily have a lot of control. Many of the grants for artists may be preset amounts. We give away 10 grants of $5,000 and you can't really ask for a specific amount, but it's something, of course, to pay attention to as you're doing your research. And type of support, do they do project support? Do they only do residencies? All of that, things you're going to come up with when you do your research. And at the end of this presentation, I'll tell you how to get the handouts, which does include a resource list, which will give you some references to to online sources that we're going to look at now. We're going to start with the Foundation Center's website. foundationcenter.org is our URL here, which I'm trying to circle. There we go. And I'm specifically looking at a resource called Foundation Grants to Individuals Online. This is our database of foundations that do have specifically that you can apply for. We were talking earlier about direct versus indirect. This is direct. So funders that have programs for individuals. And it's not just for artists, it's for anything. But there are many grants for artists in this database. And I'm just doing what you start out with is the keyword search. You can I'll also show you the advanced search. And I just put in documentary film is my keyword. And it came up with, it tells me there are 30 total. And it's showing 25 at a time. And you have ways to narrow down over on the side. So of course, media is one of the main areas, media communications. You could also do geography, so I could click on national if I wanted to limit it that way. Once you open up a record, documentary educational resources is what I opened, and they talk about in limitations. That's the first thing you want to focus on for the production and distribution of documentary films. Okay, and then look at their purpose and activities. They talk about cultivating community engagement. So it's not just, okay, limitations may sound good. I mean, as long as you don't see anything in limitations, it's going to make you ineligible. You keep reading, and you're going to look for common language affinities with the foundation. Now, that being said, if you see something in limitations that would knock you out of the running, then that's it. Okay, I'm not going to meet their guidelines. I'm not eligible. I'm going to keep going. This clearly is not going to work for me. But looking at the rest of their record, looks like they do. This is one of those organizations that does fiscal sponsorship. And notice they have some specific areas related to their fiscal sponsorship program. They're national. And it does have some publications. They do accept applications, etc. So it gives you a little bit of information. And we did have a website for them, so that's something you'd be looking at to get more information. So I think if you're looking at a record, a profile like that, you're going to get a little bit of information, usually just enough to tell you, oh, okay, this may be a possibility. I need to do some more research. Look at the foundation's website, get in touch with them directly to see what develops. I'm going now into the advanced search. So what we did so far was just documentary film, just the quick keyword search. But we remember from the home page there was an advanced search choice. If you click on that, this is what you would come up with. So it allows you to do a very targeted search and look at a whole list of terms under fields of interest. And there are a lot of fields of interest that would be relevant. I mean, you could start with arts. That's the most general. I went down into visual arts. And within visual arts, there's a whole breakdown. So, it's really up to you. Do I want to start in on the most focused, most narrow, or do I want to look at the more general terms? And you're probably doing a combination of both eventually and looking at everything. But I decided to focus in on the narrow first, so I did visual arts, painting, and looking at the index is very helpful because it tells me there are 23 foundations that have visual arts painting as their field of interest. So I know when I do the search, I'm going to bring up 23, and lo and behold, that's what I'm bringing up. And from here, you can narrow it down further. For example, you can do geography. Now, national is our way of saying open to people anywhere in the country. And international could be open to people anywhere in the world. So you may want to narrow down by geography. Notice there's also gets into types of support like residencies. I narrowed it down by geography to national, international funders. So now we have a shorter list of 9 funders that are interested in visual arts painting and fund nationally or internationally. And here's that one we had seen earlier, Pollock Krasner. So some information about what they do, and we have the limitations is the first thing you're going to focus on. And they do talk about grants based on financial aid as well as merit, financial need as well as merit, to painters, not just painters, but also sculptors and artists who work on paper. And of course, you'd say, okay, it sounds like me, and you'd look at their purpose and activities, however, and see, individuals who have worked as artists over a significant period of time. Okay, so you'd have to figure out what that means. If you're an emerging artist, it may not be enough time, but it gives you, as I said, you're just getting enough information here to figure out if there's even a possibility. And going back into my advanced search, I did want to show you how what's available as types of support. So my field of interest, I changed. I'm now doing media, film, video. And I wanted to find more fiscal sponsors that may help me find funding for my film project. So now I'm looking at the index for types of support, and you can see all of the possibilities here. So we have general, fellowships, and here's fiscal agent sponsor. 88 that say they do fiscal sponsorship. And when I do the search, I bring up 35 that do fiscal sponsorship related to film. So these are organizations in the business of being fiscal sponsors. So, and I think for a lot of funding projects, a lot of arts projects, getting a fiscal sponsor is a good step to help you raise additional funding. Especially if you want to raise more money from foundations, corporations, also individuals who may want to give to you but may also want to get a tax deduction, which they can do if they give to your fiscal sponsor, grant that's money that's directed for your project, but they can get a tax deduction because your fiscal sponsor is a 501c3. So even if you're thinking, I want to go up on Kickstarter, it's very helpful to have a fiscal sponsor. Now, how can you access grants to individuals online? It is actually a fee-based service, so you can pay $20 a month to subscribe, which you may want to do, but you don't have to. You can find the Foundation Center in your community. I'm here back at the grantspace.org website where we earlier looked at the skill area for fiscal sponsorship. They have Find Us, where you can figure out where is the Foundation Center in my state. You can do a search by your zip code, city, state, or just browse by your state. And here's a list of all the locations in Florida. These are primarily public libraries. These are organizations that are established. They're part of our network, so they offer the free access to our database. Oops, sorry, I went too fast. Another free source I wanted to talk to you about is called the Request for Proposal Bulletin. And this is in foundationcenter.org within our Philanthropy News Digest, Request for Proposals. And we get requests for proposals from foundations all over the country. Foundations, nonprofit grant makers, they have set amount of money available, usually a specific deadline, and these are for anything and everything. So not just arts, but arts, of course, is one of the categories, arts and culture. And it is for organizations as well as individuals, so it's kind of a mix, and you have to really just kind of sort through, and you can pretty much tell from the title. Okay, this is for organizations, but some of them may be for individuals, like for Creative Capital funds individuals. So when you click on their headline, you can get the information, about what they do for artists. This is, in their own words, summing up their request for proposal. And, we do, of course, have a link back to the organization, a link to the complete RFP. We also allow you to subscribe to Request for Proposal Bulletin. So if you say, I want to subscribe, if you say add me, you can put in your email address and you would want to sign up for the RFP Bulletin. And you would get the most recently posted RFPs sent to you every week. So that's a good thing to sign up for if you haven't already. I'm going to move on to look at the New York Foundation for the Arts. And you may say, I'm not in New York. Why do I care about them? Well, they have a lot of services and information for people, artists all over the country, all over the world. So they're not just focused on the arts. And as we already saw, they have a fiscal sponsorship program, which is open to people all over the country, not just people in New York. They also produce this database called NIFA Source, the resource for artists. And it is a free service. You do have to register to use it, but it is free. And it does include grant awards, other services to artists. So it's really meant to be as it tells you, an extensive national directory of award services and publications for artists. So when you go in to do a search, you can narrow it down by your discipline. So I just chose literature, and you can do a subset of that discipline. You can also then narrow it down by type of award, and a lot of language we've seen already. In terms of what you may be looking for, you can then go to location. And I said programs open to applicants living in any U.S. state. You can also, of course, choose your state. And then when you do a search, you just bring up a list, in this table format, giving you the short list of awards, and then you would click on the Learn More to learn more about them. And as I said, this is a totally free service. Great information about support for artists, so should certainly take advantage of it if you're not already using NIFA Source or Grants Individuals Online or the Request for Proposal Bulletin. There's a lot of great stuff out there. Eventually, you're going to get enough information that you're able to apply to a prospective funder. And of course, they all have their own process and application procedure. So the good news is that many more of these folks are putting their information up online. So much less likely that you're going to have to call or have to write to anybody, but maybe. The application, varies enormously. We did already talk about some being for nomination only, by nomination only. So you can't, those don't have open application processes. You have to be nominated. And sometimes, like MacArthur Genius Awards, totally mysterious, not transparent at all in terms of who nominates and how you might, it's anyone's guess how, who's on the committee and how people are selected. Other awards by nomination only may be a little more transparent and say, this is our nominating committee, this is how you can be nominated, these are the people who can nominate you. So you may get a better sense of how you might get on the radar screen. But those that do have an open process, if you're in the performing arts, you may have an audition or performance, send in your digital media files. Certainly for visual artists, sending samples of your work. So looking for, well, in this day and age, whatever things you have in digital format, press releases or other critical acclaim you can share with funders. This is really building up your portfolio, your work samples. So if you're a beginning artist, you may need to spend the time and money building up your portfolio before you're even ready to apply. You want to make sure you have a body of work that's representative of your style, reflects your best work, and you want to choose your samples wisely for each award program. Submit pieces that, of course, best convey your creative approach and technical expertise. Also, make sure the samples reflect your current work. And in many cases, they're going to give you guidelines saying, it has to be work you've completed within the past certain number of years. And you also want to think about supporting the selected discipline you're applying for as much as possible. Show samples that are applicable to the project. For example, if it's sculptor and they give awards focusing on work in metal, you don't want to send them all your work that's in wood or something crazy like that. So think about do they have a focus in this award, and can I show work that best represents that? And in many cases, part of the research process would be to look at past award winners. So who have they funded before? Do I see any, do any patterns emerge in terms of the types of work, types of artists they usually fund? And here's an example of an application from the Bader Fund. So this is pretty typical, the types of things they want you to submit. This is for the visual arts. So giving you specific, now this is a few years old, so they probably don't request slides anymore, but they used to. But here's a more, here's the actual application form, the typical kinds of things they may ask you about, essentially your resume, CV, your whole history, and references, and then proposal. So this is typical, like essentially your artist statement, and what would this grant mean? What would you accomplish with this grant? Well, I want to thank you for your attention today, as we've talked about grant seeking for individual artists, and I think it is about even grant seeking for individuals. You still want to think about relationships, building relationships with arts funders in your community, what it could be your state or local arts agency, with your colleagues in the arts, to develop collaborative projects, to hear about new opportunities. And it's all about doing your homework, researching funders, seeing what is your universe, getting a key list of arts funders in your discipline that you'll want to focus on. And I certainly would encourage you to check out the Foundation Center's resources, also the New York Foundation for the Arts that we talked about. And another thing you can take a look at on grantspace.org, we already talked about the skill areas, finding a location near you, but we also have subject pages, including one, of course, for arts and culture, which has a lot of good resources. And this is for artists and arts organizations, so it's kind of all over the place. But we do have a lot of live chats, including this one, The Artist is an Entrepreneur. Also film and video fundraising, crowdfunding, so a whole live chat about things like Kickstarter and how to work on Kickstarter, how to get it to work for you, rather. Here are links directly to those RFPs that we talked about, even tweets from funders in the arts. So that's all on grantspace.org. And then here are more of those frequently asked questions that we were talking about earlier, looking for grants in specific areas of the arts. And here's if you do go to look at the frequently asked question, the knowledge base article, here's typical format, and we usually give you a lot of references to books, to other websites that you'll want to look at. Speaking of which, here's a link to get the handouts for this webinar, a printout of the slides, also some worksheets to help you develop your personal profile, and a resource list. So I want to thank you for tuning in with us today and wish you success in your fundraising. Have a great rest of your day.